Welcome to Tommy Solo's Famous Friends. This is where I get to chat with people in the entertainment world that I've connected with over the years, most of whom are all just a little bit more famous than I am. And today it is my great pleasure to have on the show Henry Small. Welcome to the show, Henry.
How you doing, Tommy?
Well, I'm doing okay. We're all in this together, and I guess we'll get through it together. So I know that you were born in the States, and you've made your reputation as a singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and radio personality in Canada. When did you actually arrive in Canada?
Well, I met a man in upstate New York who was part of a band called the Fendermen in 1968. And we kind of kept in touch loosely. He became a manager of a band in Calgary called the Gainsborough Gallery, and they were looking for a singer. And I got this phone call and said, "Would you like to come to Canada and audition for the Gainsborough Gallery?" And at the time, I had gone to school in upstate New York, right near the Canadian border, and I had been going to Canada to see lots of acts, different R&B acts, and so I was kind of familiar with Montreal, and Cornwall was the gateway to all of the Cornwall, Ontario. So when I got the call, I was done with school and I was playing, but I kind of wanted a new thing. So I agreed to come up and auditioned, and that was in the fall of 1969. And the port of entry for me was Calgary, and that's where I first lived in Canada and began doing music up here.
Cool. Now, people that know your name, that know who Henry Small is, mostly know about the band Prism. Some know about Scrubbaloe Caine. And I know that you did some work with Burton Cummings and John Entwistle, etc. But how did you actually get into music? When did you start?
Well, as a kid, I begged my parents. I think I was probably about 5, 6 years old. I saw a guy named Florian Zabot. I always remembered his name. I can't remember anything else, but I remember his name. And I watched him play violin, and this is in the early 50s probably. And for whatever the reason, it struck a chord with me, so to speak. And I kept begging my parents for a violin. And that's where it kind of started for me. My brother and I both took piano lessons at an early age, and my mother was a singer as well, not professional, but she would sing at weddings and stuff like that. She had a great voice. And so, it was early on that I got into music and started doing little recitals. My brother would accompany me on piano, and I would play the violin.
So I think that from what I know, Scrubbaloe Caine was your first major recording act. Was that something that happened through a relationship, or how did you get that gig?
That's a good question. I'd have to think about that for a minute. I was playing in Calgary with the Gainsborough Gallery. That broke up. I hooked up with a guy named Paul Dean, who later went on to Street Art and Loverboy. And we had a band called Cannonball. And there was a connection with some guys in Vancouver, Al Foreman, Jimmy Harmata, and Bob Kidd. And they wanted to come, we wanted to put something together that was sort of bluesy, country, rock, that kind of stuff. Who knew? And they moved to Calgary, and we actually had a house which we rented. And one of the guys, Jimmy Harmata, I remember, had played in Quebec City. So from Calgary, our first gig was in, Quebec City. And in those days, we're all 20 years old, and who cared? And let's go. And the engagement was for 2 weeks, which was kind of crazy to go all the way from Calgary, pack everything up, and go to Quebec City. But we were young, and it was fun, and it was an adventure. Anyway, we ended up playing at the Cirque Electrique, which was a club, and a beautiful club with a revolving dance floor, and it was an old theater that had been redone as a club. And we actually played there we were held over for 7 months. And it was 7 days a week, 6 hours a night, plus a matinee on Sunday along with Sunday night's performance. And the place was packed every night. And it was just a wonderful experience. And of course, as you know, when you're playing 6 hours a night, the tendency is either you break up or you get a lot better in a hurry. So that's
I was
pretty
just
much
going to
what
say
happened.
that if you want to test the salt in your band, go on tour in Quebec. And I mean, it's always been that way. Yeah.
Yeah.
What they were like in the 80s, they were going till 2 or 3 in the morning when everybody else was done by 1. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we'd start at 8 o'clock at night, 10-minute breaks, and I mean 10-minute breaks. It was owned by bikers, so you didn't mess around.
Yeah, don't mess with the rock machine. Yeah.
But we became a pretty formidable band. It was a very exciting band. I mean, if I knew then what I know now, it was probably the most exciting live act I was ever really part of. I mean, we were into it, and there was a show every night, and I mean a show, and it was just, there was nothing make-believe about it. We were digging what we were doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how things go when you're in a band and you're away from home, you're touring and doing those grueling shows. And, I found in my own experience that you're out in the road in the middle of nowhere, and then suddenly you realize that everybody's a jerk but you. And chemistry aside, whatever, you move on, and then years later you're going, what if I had stuck with that? Anyway, So then at some point in time, you got a 3-year writing deal, and as I understand, that led you to an appearance on the Midnight Special, Burt Sugarman's Midnight Special.
Well, yeah, that was later on. After Scrubbaloe, I started a band called Small Wonder. And Small Wonder originated in Toronto with 2 guys from upstate New York that had come up, and a drummer, Billy King. Was it Billy King or Bob King? Billy King, I think. Forgive me, Bill or Bob. But who was playing with Lighthouse after Skip Crowcroft had left or whatever. And he joined us, and we all were discovered opening for Jeff Beck at Massey Hall. And there was a CBS convention at the time, and one of the guys that was there was Joe Wizard, who was a well-known producer, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and Boss Skaggs, and Helen Reddy, and a bunch of other people. So he saw us play open for Jeff Beck, and for whatever reason came backstage and said, I'm taking you to L.A. And I laughed at the time because I thought, yeah, right, I've heard this stuff before. Anyway, he was for real, and not long after that, we all moved to LA and started to record for CBS at that time.
Cool. And how did you end up with Prism? I mean, I talked to Rocket Norton a while ago, and from his account, that band just started out as a bunch of hippies in Montreal, and somehow, they went in the studio and got some pretty awesome stuff recorded. How did you, I know that Ron Tabak was fired, but how did you end up taking his place?
Again, Paul Dean came into the picture because he recommended me to Bruce Allen. I got a call from Bruce Allen, who was the manager at the time. And I was in LA, and I thought, geez, I was just starting to get established in LA, and I didn't really, And then, I talked to Bruce, and Bruce being Bruce, and he said, come on up and try it out, see what it is, and you can live with me at my house. And, he made it sound pretty good. So that's what I did. So I didn't move up there, so to speak, but I did stay up there for 2 or 3 months.
Okay. And that was a pretty successful version of the band as well. I think I remember.
Well, there's a lot of controversy about it because everybody that was a Prism fan, obviously, liked Prism being Prism, and that was with Ron Tabak. I mean, it's very difficult to change a lead vocalist and maintain your old fans.
Yeah, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I got beat up a lot for that, and I had, interestingly enough, I know Rocket's take on it, but I was, the producer came up from LA, John Carter. He said, I'll take you, Henry, and you, Lindsay, and I think Al came down later on for a little bit, Al Harlow. But basically, I had no say anyway. Bruce owned the name, and if I wanted to record, which I did, obviously, I went along with the program.
You know, I often think about bands like Journey. Once Steve Perry left, you know, whatever they did just didn't work. They didn't have that chemistry. Even, you know, they ended up hiring basically a Perry tribute act, and
yeah,
he almost looked like Steve Perry. And honestly, he's probably a more powerful singer, and he's a lot more energetic and so on. But people have never really gotten over it. And I totally understand the adversity you faced coming into Prism.
Yeah,
You're a much cleaner vocalist than what he was. And, you know, he had that distinct sound, and there's no getting around that. But your styles are so different, you know, and it is what it is. But I don't envy a guy who was in that position like you were.
no, it really, you know, God, I got bashed left, right, and center, even by guys in the band. But the truth of the matter is, Lindsay went down to LA. Lindsay didn't really have a lot of material at that time. So he kind of lost interest because really the producer was picking the songs, picking studio guys to play with. And that's what it became. It became more of a, it wasn't really Prism, and I understand that as far as but for me, it was an opportunity. And I think anybody else in my place would have done the same thing. You either take the opportunity or you walk away.
Yeah.
I took the opportunity.
Yeah, a paid gig is a paid gig.
Yeah, and it worked well. I mean, as far as the States were concerned, yeah, we had a gold record, and it was, you know, it was relatively successful. And that was the point of taking that record deal and being a part of it.
Right. Now, did Burton Cummings come after that?
No, Burton Cummings was before that. I had finished recording 2 albums with CBS with Small Wonder. Through that, through Scrubbaloe, I mean, it's all connected. I guess through Scrubbaloe, we opened for the Guess Who in Toronto at the CNE, and people went nuts. And of course, Don Hunter, who was the manager at the time, he was all over us to move to Winnipeg, and he would manage us, and that's where we got our record deal in the States with RCA with Scrubbaloe. After Scrubbaloe, Small Wonder did 2 albums with Columbia in Los Angeles. Through that Scrubbaloe experience, I had met Burton, I had met Jim Martin, who was then his road manager. So we, you know, were friends, and Burton was going on tour, and I got a phone call one day from Jim Martin saying that Jimmy Phillips, the keyboard player of Small Wonder, was being hired for Burton's band. And I said, oh, that's great. And he said, yeah, we're looking for 2 female backup singers. And I said, jokingly, I said, well, I can do that. And I needed a gig for sure. There was nothing going on. And so he said, you would do that? And I said, yeah, you bet. So that's how I got with Burton.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, you know, that's life. You know, you can plan this and do that, but shit comes out of the blue, you know, and you either go with it or you don't. But Burton was a great experience for me. It really pushed me vocally, and we did a lot of cool stuff. I mean, and he was very gracious. I mean, he gave me a solo spot. I did 2 or 3 songs, and then I did a duet with him. So, and got a lot of attention that way, and so it was very good and a good experience.
Yeah, that would be a really, really tight band.
Yeah, another really good band, and Burton was Burton's Burton. He's a great singer and a great performer, and yeah, a very good experience for me in a whole lot of ways. So
yeah, well, I have a good friend, John Rowlands, who's known as the photographer to the stars, and he's done a lot of work with Burton Cummings on tour. They were supposed to be doing a tour. Just a quick editorial note. As Henry and I were talking over the distance between London, Ontario, Canada, and where he is in Mexico, our call was dropped a couple of times, so that's why there's a disconnect in the conversation about Burton Cummings. I was about to say that John Rowlands and Burton Cummings' tour was stopped abruptly due to COVID. Now back to the interview. And we were talking about
Cool.
Burton Cummings before we got disconnected again.
Yeah. Anyway, Burton, that kind of kept my present and created a lot of opportunities for me. And that's how Prism, I think, came along. I mean, Paul and I had worked together in the past with Scrubbaloe and all of that. And we always had a pretty good relationship. And so I think that kind of opened the doors for me going to Prism. And then when Prism was, by the time the second album had come out, I started to put together another band with Aynsley Dunbar, a great English drummer, and Tim Bogart from Bogart a Piece and Beck Bogart a Piece. And through that band, met a guy from BMI, Mr. McDougall, and he said, oh, you know, John Entwistle's looking for a singer. And I went, well, that's nice, but I'm like really into what I'm doing right now. And he said, well, you know, just send a tape because they've gone through a lot of guys trying to be in the band and they haven't found anybody. So I did it on a lark, and once again, you know, I get a phone call back saying, come over to England and record. So obviously, you know, when you're playing with a musical icon like John was, I said yes and went over to England, and what was supposed to be a few weeks turned into several months. And yeah, did a couple tours with John, and then had a family and moved to Kamloops.
Yeah, it's quite a nice area in BC. I have family in northern BC and also family closer to Vancouver. So if you got to pick a nice place in Canada, that's a pretty good choice for sure.
Yeah, it was, it was a little bit of a culture shock.
If you're a big city boy, yeah.
Yeah, at first there was a culture shock, but then, you know, I had opportunities that came along in Kamloops that I would have never had if I had remained in LA. So, you know, life takes you where you need to go.
Now, ironically, you went from being the iconic lead vocalist in all these different acts to being the morning radio guy. How did that happen?
Yeah, I wish I could tell you. I mean, I became the arts coordinator for the city of Kamloops, which sounds really great, but it was $10 an hour for 2 days a week. And through that, I used to go up to the radio station for a 5-minute kind of bit on the arts in Kamloops once a week. And I guess, you know, everybody kind of looked forward to that. So they actually asked me at one point if I would do every morning, which, you know, like most things in my life, I didn't really think was a great idea at the time because I'd have to get up at 5:30 in the morning every morning. And I was used to going to bed at 5:30 in the morning. So, but it turned out to be great. And it was music, and it was telling my stories, which I have thousands of, and I think most old musicians that have traveled and done stuff with different people have very interesting stories. So, you know, there's, for example, if a song came on, I would have something connected to at least 60-70% of, you know, whether it was April Wine or it was Bad Company or The Who or, you know, through my experiences, there were stories that were personal stories, and that really resonated. And so we had a great show, and it went on what I thought was going to last for maybe a couple of months because of my mouth. Went on for 27 years. So it was, you know, I've always been a person that no matter what, whatever work I did, it had to be creative and it had to be directly or indirectly something to do with music. So radio kind of fit that bill. And guess what? I had a paycheck for the first time in my life on a regular basis. So that was very cool.
Yeah, 27 years has got to be some sort of a record for anybody in radio to stay with one station. Wow. You know, I talked to Greg Simpson, who's recently passed away, but he was a well-known music promoter and radio guy in Canada as well. And he said to me, after all the years, and he'd been doing it for 50, 60 years already, he said, after all these years, I'm proud to say I have made hundreds of dollars. You know,
yeah, pretty much. Pretty much.
It's a thankless industry. Yeah.
It sure is. But, you know, you're used to that with music. One day everybody's kissing your ass, and the next day you can't even get in the door. So you learn pretty quickly not to take praise or whatever very seriously. Nice to hear, but you don't live on it, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, you're one of those guys who certainly earned the praise over the years and had a bit of a, battle being that guy that came into Prism and all that. But you certainly have earned your stripes. Now, I know that you're retired from radio these days, but you also did some movie soundtrack work. Is there anything that we would be familiar with that you had your hand in?
Well, I mean, the movies that I did were in the 80s, although I just sent out a bunch of songs that I just recorded before I left for Mexico. And I work with some people in the movie industry to, sell songs and do whatever. So I'm active that way. Playing wise, I mean, one of the reasons why I came to Mexico was that I have friends down here that are great musicians, and we can play outdoors. There's tons of venues that enable us to play safely through this COVID thing. So yeah, I'm having a lot of fun doing that. Better than staring out the window. And it's making me kind of be reborn musically in the sense that I'm interested again. I want to write and I want to perform. And even at this age, I can still do it pretty well. So as long as I can do it pretty well, then I'll continue on.
Yeah, might as well keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Playing for me, writing, being creative musically is my lifeblood. And for a while there, I didn't think much of it because you have a lot of experiences that tell you, well, you got to do this. I had 3 kids, I had to make a living and doing lots of other things. But now I have time to focus on just playing music and being grateful that at this stage of the game I still can.
Now, I'm curious, I know a lot of artists who insisted on making a living strictly through the music, and a lot of those guys were never really happy. But then there are some who, unbeknownst to the rest of us, had day jobs throughout the whole process. And they seem to have had a lot more artistic freedom and, the ability to do what they wanted instead of having to maybe join a polka band or a show band or something to, what I'm saying? Like, did you find that you had a little bit more freedom with your creativity when you were doing the radio gig, for example?
Absolutely. I mean, I produced and directed musical theater for the Rocky Mountain Railway for years. I did some TV work. We had a movie review show that was going on. I started to do major events in the city of Kamloops, and then started Music in the Park. That was 20-something years ago, too. And that runs every night of the week until COVID, of course, but that ran every night of the week for 2 months straight. So, yeah, there's been, did I make a lot of money? Well, you're in the arts, right? But, I had 3 kids and they had to go to college and all of that. So you bust your ass and you do 6 or 7 different things, which is what I did. Now I can lie in the sun and play music at night and sit around and play guitar or violin and write. So life is, full circle. It's back to where it was when I was 20 years old, where I can focus strictly on just music.
Well, you've certainly earned this life. I don't really have any more questions for you, Henry, but at this point in the show, I like to give my guests the last word. So if there's something that you particularly feel passionate about, this is the time to speak to the people about your passion. Well,
I was talking about this with my wife this morning. I think you have to have a dream. And, I always told my kids and say it to everybody, I guess, keep your head in the clouds, but keep your feet in the ground. And, if you have something that you are fortunate enough to love and have passion for, follow it with all your heart, even through all of this. I mean, there's been it's been a depressing time for many people. And thank God that I had something that I loved that really literally became reborn because of this virus. So, out of the worst things, if you continue to pursue no matter what, good things start to happen.
Sage words of advice. I don't know what I would personally have done over the years with the different things that have happened in my life without the music. And I think we are so fortunate to have this
you bet.
in us, and
it's a pain in the ass, right?
It is.
Music, it's a curse, right? You love what you do, but you can't get a loan. You know, if you're not doing this, you're a bum. You know, the whole thing. I mean, my parents never even talked to me for like 3 years. But you know, like you were about to say, and I think what you're about to say is, you wouldn't be doing a podcast. You wouldn't be doing the stuff that you're doing if it hadn't been for COVID. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I've even gotten more music done due to this whole situation. So again, we are very lucky that we have this magical power in us. And you know what? I look forward to a time when we can get full on, back to it with the shows in North America wide. And until that time, I'm just glad that I have the opportunity to talk to people like you. And I thank you so much for being on the show today. This has been great. So until next time, cheers.
Hey, man. Thanks, Tommy.
And I thought I was a journeyman musician. Well, Henry Small has me beat. He's had a long and illustrious career, and he's continuing on in Mexico, as we discussed on the show. Now, here is one of his newer releases that you can find on the Henry Small fan page. This is called Kiss It.
The sun is dark. There's a shadow on my heart. Yeah. The sun is dark. There's a shadow on my heart. Now I know we don't see eye to eye. Kiss my ass goodbye. Yeah. My tears are falling. Well, they're falling down like rain. My tears are falling. Oh, there's so much pain. Leaving you is gonna make me cry. But kiss my ass goodbye. Come on, kiss it. Kiss it goodbye, kiss it. Kiss it goodbye. Yeah, kiss it. You're hurting me, and I don't know why. Kiss my ass goodbye. Yeah, that's all you got to do, babe. The sun is dark. There's a shadow on my heart. The sun is dark. There's a shadow on my heart. You got your problem, so do I. Kiss my ass goodbye. Yeah, baby, that's what you got to do. Come on, kiss it. Oh, kiss it goodbye, kiss it. Kiss it goodbye, kiss it.
You can find that song along with a lot of Henry Small's new music on his fan page on Facebook. Tommy Solo's Famous Friends is a one-man production, meaning that I've done all the work, including producing, editing, guest acquisition, etc. All rights reserved. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The theme song for Tommy Solo's Famous Friends was written and recorded by Tommy Solo with a little help from my friends in the night crew. And hey, if you like the show, why not subscribe? Until next time, cheers.